but we have plenty of time to talk about some stuff here and then make sure there's plenty of time for you guys to have any questions that Dr. Hart and I can try and answer. So good afternoon, everyone. I know a couple of you, but vast majority I don't know. So my name is Dr. Venkateshwaran. For those of you that don't know me, Dr. V, I go by short, and obviously Dr. Hart here. I'll do most of the talking here, but one of the things I want to mention is Dr. Hart is the principal architect of this presentation, and then I just padded it out here and there. So I want to make sure I acknowledge that. So, the main focus of this, and we've been doing this now for a couple of years, is we want to target rising fourth-year students and basically present to them that of graduate school as a viable option for when you graduate, right? So I think a lot of folks, when they're moving through their engineering degree, think about going into industry right after they graduate. But one of the things that we want to try and put on your radar is there's this option called graduate school that exists and that you should realistically consider it. And we want to talk about like what are the pros and cons of doing that kind of going down this route. Okay, and also talk a little bit about the mechanics of actually going to graduate school, applying to graduate school. What are some of the timelines you should consider? Okay, and we want to put this on your radar now so that you have some time over the summer to kind of mull it over. So, if this is something you're like, oh, this seems like an interesting option. You have the summer, you can start getting some of your ducks in the row over the summer. So when you come back in the fall, you're kind of ready to kind of make the applications happen. Okay, so that's basically the general gist of this presentation. And one of the things that I want to emphasize here, because I get this question a lot from students, is if you make it through MSOE's ME undergraduate curriculum in good shape, you are really well prepared for graduate school, right? And I'm not saying this to pump your tires, right? Or the fact that I work here, so they pay me to say this kind of stuff, right? I objectively do believe that. Like, we have a really outstanding curriculum, and the stuff that you're exposed to, honest to God, there are things here that I never saw as an undergrad when I was going through my ME degree, right? That I wish that I had seen. So I just want to allay any sort of fears that the curriculum here positions you really well to be successful in graduate school, okay? So the question that I want to try and answer here is, what are some of the things that you need to get into graduate school? What is the cost of going to graduate school? Let's be honest, the third question is something that we all worry about is how much more do I get paid if I go to graduate school? Because I think that's a reasonable question, right? How would your day-to-day job change if I get a graduate degree? What is the mechanics of applying to graduate school? What are the different graduate school programs that exist, right? And one of the things that I want to emphasize here is I'm going to talk primarily about graduate degrees in engineering. Now, there are other graduate degrees too, like an MBA, like JD if you want to go to law school, MDs if you want to go to medical school. I know nothing about those things, right? So I'm not really going to talk about those things. So I'm going to keep the focus mainly on engineering graduate degrees, okay? And then obviously the timeline, like what are we talking about? How long is a master's degree? How long is a graduate PhD degree, okay? So those are some of the main things that I want to talk about. But what I do want to emphasize first and foremost is your undergraduate ME degree is an extremely powerful and useful degree, right? So you shouldn't be thinking, I have to go to graduate school to make something of myself. You can do plenty and a lot with your undergraduate degree that hopefully you'll earn in about a year's time, okay? So I have some numbers here just to kind of convince you of that fact. So this is a table from the PayScale website where they track like median and average salaries of different major degrees. And if you look at folks that earn a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, your average entry-level salary is about 80 grand, okay? And then your mid-career is about 130K. So that's a reasonable growth in salary, right? If you compare starting salary to mid-career salary. The other thing that I think is worth looking at is there's this idea of what's called a meaning score. So a meaning score is like how much intrinsic value do you get from the work that you do associated with that degree? Okay, so basically 49% of people that were polled said, I derive meaning from doing the work that I do. To kind of give you a little bit of perspective, jobs that have, say, 95% meaning scores are folks like nurses, people that do music therapy, like that are very much working with people one-on-one. helping them through difficult times. Like those people typically report very high meaning scores. So for an engineering degree where about 50% of people are saying that, it's actually pretty good, okay? And then from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this is some of the most recent statistics about the mechanical engineering degree. Is, you know, if you look at the 2023 median pay for somebody holding an ME degree, you're talking about $99,500 per year as your median salary, okay? And the other really nice thing to look at here is the number of jobs in 2022 that needed an ME degree was about 286,000. That is well above average if you compare it to other jobs needing other degrees. Okay, so ME degrees, what's that basically telling you is in very, very high demand. Okay, the other thing that I think is also useful, because you're probably going to be thinking about the long-term prospects of it. The job outlook for the next 10 years is basically saying that the growth rate of ME jobs is about 10%, 10% every year. So that means we're going to be adding about 10% of this is about, say, 3,000. So every year, the number of ME jobs is going to increase by another 3,000 jobs, right? So that means people are going to be looking to hire MEs for a long time to come. And I think a large part of that is because there's a lot of industries that are moving back towards the US. There's things like the CHIPS Act that got passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is hoping to move more manufacturing and more high technology sort of jobs back towards the US, which is going to demand those kind of sort of background and training, okay? So hopefully these are some things that tell you the value of the degree you are going to earn, okay? Now, on top of that, I have some graphics here that just show some common sort of career paths for folks holding bachelor's degrees in mechanical engineering. So, you know, here, if you look at a mechanical engineer, they can go on to become senior mechanical engineers, design engineers, aerospace engineers, and from there you can move on to all sorts of other roles like project engineers, you know, VPs, directors, and so on and so forth. So there's a variety of different paths to go with mechanical engineering. And one of the things that I often tell students, especially during admitted student days, is that I also know people who come to the end of mechanical engineering and decide, I want nothing to do with mechanical engineering after this, and move into other fields like finance, for instance. And they do extremely well because what the degree is equipping you with is a set of very diverse skills that are easily translatable into any number of domains, any number of fields, right? So, you know, Dr. Panhans, who was our former chair, used to say an ME degree is not a life sentence, right? So you getting an ME degree does not mean that you're forever stuck being an ME, right? You can do a whole host of things, and I think the degree is uniquely designed to help you do that if you decide to pivot into other positions down the line, okay? And then here's another graphic, I mean, which basically shows what are the different things you can do with a mechanical engineering degree. You know, things like services, where you're working with, say, consulting companies like MEP, so that's mechanical, electrical, plumbing companies that do those kind of works for like buildings and things like that, right? So you work with civil engineers for the most part. Machinery manufacturing, if you want to do scientific R&D, if you want to go into aerospace manufacturing, federal government, chemical engineering industry, oil and gas, they hire MEs all the time, right? So you really have the options of things that you want to get into once you graduate with your bachelor's degree in ME, okay? And then the other thing that I pulled out, and again, this is highly dependent on which site you go to, but these guys polled, you know, mechanical engineers, about 5,000 of them, and basically said, how satisfied are you with your job? And they looked at the average rating and it was about 3.7, okay? Which is reasonably good, okay? It's above average. Again, telling you that most people, when they get an ME degree, get an ME position, they're generally pretty happy with what they're doing. So those are all, I think, factors that hopefully tell you a little bit about the power of your ME degree, okay? So to summarize a couple of things here. So what are some of the benefits? Above average salary, tons of ME related jobs that are available, okay? It's a pretty good debt to income ratio. So again, depending on where you look, trade a little bit, but if you look at what percentage of your monthly take home pay you are using to pay your debt, it's about 7%. There are majors where the debt to income ratio is like quarter, so 25%, okay? So this is generally pretty good. It's telling you that what you're taking home is fairly significant, and you can pay down your debt relatively quickly, so you're not saddled with it for an extended period of time, okay? Like I was mentioning, high job flexibility, engineering, non-engineering, you're in good shape to tackle those things. And hopefully I've made the case that well above average job growth rate, looking down the line, okay? What are some of the drawbacks? The meaning score is average, okay? So you, on a day-to-day basis, you may not be deriving extraordinary amount of meaning from your job the same way, say, nurses or folks that do child psychology, those kind of things, right? It may not be comparable to that. Okay, so that's
Strangely, Garbage Man has a very high meaning score.
garbage men have very high.
It's not necessarily correlated to like how much money you make. It's
Yeah.
not like, do you feel like you impact the world? Yeah.
That's right.
I always thought that one was funny.
I know, because I actually did, I sorted the table according to that. That was.
Sanitation worker.
That's right. The other thing that's also, I think, this is sort of the, double-edged sword issue with mechanical engineering is because there are a lot of jobs and because a lot of engineering programs, if you look at engineering departments around the country, the biggest department is often mechanical engineering, right? ME is typically the biggest department in any engineering college, which means we typically graduate a lot of MEs relative to other degrees. So that means there's often a lot of competition for jobs, right? Because there's just a lot of MEs that are graduating every year relative to other engineering degrees, okay? Lots of responsibility, attention to detail, and technical know-how required. Hopefully you're getting a flavor of this, especially from your junior level classes. And again, depending on the industry, you don't want to like pick on folks, but think about Boeing, right? Engineers that work in Boeing, yeah? I mean, they have an extraordinary amount of responsibility, and if they don't take that responsibility seriously, the issues that you read about in the paper are where things get to, right?
We're start falling off.
Yeah,
It's energy.
doors start falling off, planes start falling out of the sky. Same goes for things like, say, in the biomedical industry. If you're not careful about what you're doing, medical devices start failing. There are a lot of MEs in those fields as well. It can have very real tangible impact on people, right? So that is part of the responsibility of becoming a mechanical engineer. And depending on the industry, the promotion track can be limited for folks holding bachelor's degrees. So in other words, if the bachelor's degree is the only thing that you have, you may sort of hit up against a glass ceiling in terms of how far up you can sort of climb the corporate ladder, for instance. Okay, so those are, like with anything else, there's going to be benefits and drawbacks. But the key thing to keep in mind is the bachelor's degree on its own is a really powerful worthwhile degree. Okay, so I want to make sure you're aware of that so that you're not pressuring yourself to do something that you don't want to do or necessarily need to do. Okay. So with that out of the way, what are some reasons why you should pursue an ME graduate degree? So there are certain types of jobs that require additional levels of training. So things like if you want to work in R&D in certain industries, if you want to work in the R&D wing of an industry of a company, they typically will expect you to have a master's degree or a PhD degree, right? It's hard to do those things with mainly just a bachelor's degree, okay? If you want to become a faculty member, like the two of us, you're looking at having to get at least a master's degree, but to be honest, you're really looking at having to get a PhD, right? We'll talk a little bit about what that is. And then if you want to actually direct a research group that decides sort of the direction of new product development and things like that in a company, again, you're looking at least having a master's degree to make that happen, okay? Grad degrees in engineering are highly respected, right? And once you have that, it can start giving you some additional flexibility. It can start opening up some additional options, again, depending on what kind of background you're looking at. You might make more money. I'll show you some numbers. The might is capitalized for a specific reason. There's no guarantee of it, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And the other advantage is, depending on the type of graduate program, you could actually get paid to go to school, okay? So again, Dr. Hart and I, we didn't really pay very much money out of our pocket to get our graduate degrees because we got paid to go to graduate school. It's not a free lunch. There's some things that need to happen, right? That you have to, earn your money, right? But we'll talk a little bit about that. But you could come out of your graduate degree not being in any additional debt. Again, it depends on the specific program you're looking at, okay? So here are some reasons to avoid getting a graduate degree. Okay, so I've told you some of the positives. Here are some of the negatives, okay? If you think undergraduate loans are bad, grad loans are even worse, okay? So the graduate school loans that you're looking at are what are called grad plus loans. And if you look at them, I actually just looked at it this morning, interest rates for graduate school loans are about a little over 8%. If you compare that to undergraduate degrees, it's undergraduate loans, they're about 5.5, right? So that's a fairly big step up. And the other thing also with grad school loans is it starts accruing interest right away. So as soon as you take out that loan, the interest rate starts kicking in. Okay, so you got to think about that a little bit. Typically, master's level programs cost more than an undergraduate program. Okay, so if you look at it, again, these numbers are a little fungible, but bachelor degrees, you're looking at about 24K. Master's program can be about 70K. So it's quite a bit more money that's coming out of your pocket if that's the route you want to go to. There is a high opportunity cost. If you look at sort of the average salaries that I talked about, you're looking to earn about 75K coming out of your undergrad degree, right? So for every year in graduate school, you're effectively forfeiting 75K in earnings. Okay, so that's something that you want to consider. So if you look at master's degree that lasts about 2 years, that's about 150K opportunity cost. That's sort of what you're giving up to go to graduate school. If you're looking at a PhD, 6 years, you're looking at about 450K that you're giving. Okay, so keep those things in mind. There's an argument to be made that once you leave graduate school, those are truly the best years of your life. Sorry, once you leave undergrad, those are truly the best years of your life. So some people are like, should I be spending the best years of my life getting a graduate degree? I'll try to make a case why graduate school can also be some of the best years of your life. Okay, and I want to sort of emphasize that in just a little bit. The other thing is graduate programs typically have very high attrition rates. So if you look at the number of people that start off in a master's or PhD program, about 20% of master's students will drop out. They won't ever complete the degree, right? And PhD, it's even higher. It's almost 50%. Okay, so, and the type of folks, especially for PhDs, the type of folks that are going in there are generally pretty highly motivated. So the burnout rate is still pretty high, even amongst those folks. So something to kind of keep in mind, okay? And the increases in salary that you do get with master's and a PhD degree may not necessarily offset the cost of the degree, okay? So it might take you a while to kind of recoup that cost. So these are all different things, especially the financial impact that you might want to kind of keep in mind, okay? Any questions so far? And again, there'll be plenty of questions later, but I just want to see if there's any questions right now in the immediacy. Yeah.
Is the dropout rate for all majors or engineering?
This is specifically for engineering. Yeah. And again, these numbers got turbocharged during COVID, right? So during COVID, it really skyrocketed. So I'm not sure what the current numbers are, but historically, they've generally been around that number. Okay.
That's spending best years of your life. That is a bullet from me. So I manufactured composites as part of my PhD, and the composite manufacturing lab was like in the basement of this building at Illinois. And I was like a raccoon, man. I was like down there, like all hours of the night, like making these composites, like with my hands. And, it was like, I'd be like 2 a.m. I'd have to like go turn the furnace off. And I'm like, man, this sucks sometimes. And so, yeah, but it's not a full attraction. Like you make lifelong friends and all that sort of stuff. So it's not all bad, but it was like.
And since we're here, I'll pair that out. I mean, I can remember lots of weekends, lots of evenings, just being in the lab, having to collect data, right? And some of that was because that was the only time the equipment was available, right? It's because we share equipment. Different students are using the equipment, so you kind of have to wait your turn. And as soon as you get it, you're like, you have 3 days to get all the data that you need. You better make that happen because somebody else is going to get that equipment later on, right? So if you got the equipment on Friday, you cancel weekend plans because you're like, I got to collect data all the way through Saturday, Sunday, Monday, right? And on top of that, a lot of the work that I did, that Dr. Hart did, was also funded. So either through the government or through private industry, they would give us money to do some work. So a big part of that comes down to, we have to report back to them, what did we do with the money, right? And so sometimes sponsors would come visit us, or we'd have to go visit them, and we'd have to show them, hey, this is what we did, this is what we've gotten, this is what we're going to do. So there's a lot of pressure to sort of meet requirements because there are people giving you money and they expect to get something in return for that money, right? So there are some pressures, but I will say this, right? With all the other folks that were in our research group in graduate school, we all went through the shared trauma of graduate school, right? Like these long hours, difficult courses, qualifying exams, but we all went through it together. And that was a really, significant bonding experience. And some of my closest friends to this day are the folks that I worked with in graduate school. And, the final point I'd add to this, and I think this is what separates graduate school experience from, say, undergrad. I went to graduate school at Georgia Tech down in Atlanta. And Georgia Tech Aero literally attracted people from all over the world. Yeah, and the same holds for Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. At that level, the folks that are in your classes were literally the best from around the world, not necessarily the state of Illinois, right, or the state of Wisconsin. And so when you get together with those folks, you really end up having to sort of level up your game a little bit, because all of the people that are around you are just technically very, very good. They're technically very, very motivated. But being able to share that experience with all those people is once in a lifetime opportunity. That's not something you get to do on a day-to-day basis. That is truly a unique opportunity. That's something that I cherish, but it's a tough experience. Yeah. Like there was a period where we went 3 years where we got no data, and it's just stuff doesn't work, right? Because you're trying to do something that nobody else has done before. So you're kind of really venturing into unexplored territory. So there is no roadmap to follow, right? There is no other bit of equipment that somebody else built that you could just mooch off of. Like you are doing stuff for the very first time. And so you just have to learn to develop a thick skin to put up with repeated failures. And then 1 week, things work. And that's the single greatest week of your life. And then shortly after that, everything breaks again. And then you're sort of back into the darkness for a couple of years. So that's, so I don't want to sugarcoat it and say graduate school is this amazing experience, but there are some really amazing things that are also punctuated with some challenges, right? Because you're doing something that's unique, that's challenging. So you kind of have to take the good and the bad with that. Okay. So those are some of the reasons to get a grad degree, avoid a graduate degree. Okay. So this is where I want to talk a little bit about money, lifetime earnings. So there's an economist did a bunch of work to look at what is the impact of getting different degrees on your lifetime earnings. Okay? And they basically baselined it against people that didn't have a college degree. So if you look at the first row here, let's just focus on this, where you're looking at people that get engineering degrees. So folks that got a bachelor's degree, men or women, on average, got about 25 to 32%. They earned 25 to 32% more than somebody that did not have a bachelor's degree over the course of their life. Okay, so that tells you the power of the bachelor's degree. Okay, now if you look at master's level degree, okay, so men or women, you're earning about 53 to 48% more than somebody that has no degree. But the important thing to keep in mind is looking at the differential between bachelor's to master's. So if you look at it, earning a master's degree maybe gives you an 8% bump or a 16% bump relative to somebody that has a bachelor's degree. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. And here's the really damning stat when you get to the doctoral degree, PhD degree. So if you have a PhD, you're earning between 25 to 32% more over the course of your lifetime than somebody that has no bachelor's degree. Okay. So in other words, what's the net benefit of doing a PhD versus getting an undergrad degree?
Mathematically.
It's zero. There is really no benefit on average, right? So it's basically saying if you decide to get the PhD, there's no guarantee that you're going to earn anything more than somebody who has earned a bachelor's degree. So the punchline from this is if you want really good bang for your buck, the master's degree is probably where it's at. Okay. So that's really the takeaway message. And then the other one is if you're really hoping to make it rain, doctoral degree is not the way to go. Okay, so you don't get a PhD in engineering for the money.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to be very clear because I talk to certain people. They're like, "Oh, you must be killing it." And you're like, "No, we get paid the mediocre bucks to do this."
Yeah, we get the bucks.
Yeah, we get the bucks. Right?
I like the arts degrees have negative numbers in front of them.
Yeah.
You'd be better off not getting a degree in art because of, you get a master's degree, you're okay.
Yeah, that's right.
But a man with a bachelor's degree in arts makes less money over the course of his life.
That's right.
Yeah. We do have a question. We do have a hand online. Eduardo, you want to ask something?
Yeah, so that those stats are for like a master's or PhD in engineering, correct?
Say that one more time. The volume was a little low on my computer.
So that information, those stats are for a PhD or a master's in engineering, correct?
Yeah, so it's broken out on the left-hand side of the column there with.
Yeah, so this is focusing solely on engineering.
It might be a little hard to see if you're online there. So.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So far, so good? Well, or not so good, depending on.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so what I want to do is I want to very quickly walk through what are the different engineering graduate school programs. So the first one is what you would call master's degree, non-thesis. And this is really just, you just take more classes. Okay, they're at a higher level, but it's really coursework focused. And you're really looking at maybe about a year and a half if you're doing it full time from the time that you graduate with your undergraduate degree. Now, if you're looking at a master's degree with a thesis option, you're attending some classes, maybe a little bit less than what you would be doing if it was a non-thesis option. But one of the things that you got to come out of it is you got to write a thesis, which is an original piece of work, original piece of research, where you usually spend about a year like diving into that problem, right? So you spend a year diving into that problem. Hopefully it's something that nobody has really looked at before. It's an original piece of work, okay? And you're doing that under the advisement from a university professor. Again, full time, you're looking at about 2 years, okay? But it's a little bit less coursework because the focus is a little bit more on the original thesis work. If you're looking at a PhD or a doctoral degree, again, classes, it's usually front loaded, but once you sort of get those out of the way, the real focus is the research, right? A PhD is all about research. It's producing original work, original new knowledge that nobody else has really developed. And along the way, you have to pass what are called doctoral qualifying exams. And then at the end of it all, you write a dissertation, which basically documents what is the original thing that you found. So you're talking about a 150 to 400 page document that really summarizes the work that you've done over the past 4 to 5 years. Okay, so full time, you're looking at about 6 years to complete from the time that you finish your undergrad. Okay, so those are some of the timelines. What are some of the macroscopic differences between these different degrees? Okay. If we want to compare thesis versus non-thesis master's degree, okay. So if you look at the non-thesis, which is mainly coursework based, usually with these you have a part-time or full-time options. So there are now more and more programs that have online master's degree that fall under this category. You don't have to produce original research. Lots of schools offer this option. Some companies will actually even fund it, right? So once you get hired, as part of your negotiation process, you can ask them, hey, if I want to get a master's degree, is that something that we can work out, right? Where they can pay for it. Usually with that is depending on how many years they fund your degree for, you have to make sure you work for them for that number of years. That's sort of the payback for them investing in you. Okay. These programs typically have high acceptance rates because, to be honest, for a lot of universities, this is a cash cow. Yeah, like this is where they can generate a lot of revenue. So they typically have a high acceptance rate. So with your MSOE ME degree, if this is the route you want to go, you should not have too much trouble finding a place to go. Okay. The drawbacks of this option is it is sometimes viewed as less valuable because higher acceptance rates, most people are just paying their way through it. So it's a little bit less competitive. So because of that, that's sort of the drawback of these kind of programs. Now, on the flip side, if you look at the thesis-based option, you're looking at less coursework because the focus is on the original research that we talked about. For this, you're typically paid to execute the research. So what that means is your tuition gets covered. So you're not paying any tuition. And on top of that, they'll pay you a stipend of some sort that you can use to pay rent, buy some food, things like that. Okay. And healthcare is often usually paid through the grant as well. So you don't have to pay for health insurance. That's also included as part of your package. The opportunity to do original research work and generate new knowledge can be amazing, right? I mean, to say that I'm the only one that's done this, I'm the only one that knows this much about it. I think that's pretty cool to be able to point to something like that. And as you can imagine, it's more competitive. And as a consequence, it is viewed as more valuable than just say a non-thesis option, okay? But the drawback for this is it is super competitive, right? They're paying you to do it. So I imagine more people want to do it. So that ups the ante in terms of the number of spots that are available to do that kind of stuff. And on top of that, as we'll touch upon in just a little bit, if this is the route you want to go, you are indeed beholden to that research project because that's what's paying you the stipend, the tuition, the health insurance, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so you may not be able to move too much if that's what you're coming under. Okay? So this is thesis versus non-thesis options. So let's talk a little bit about master's thesis. So the thesis option master's degree versus doctoral degree. A lot of similarities, right? So both of them, you'll require additional courses. Honestly, a master's is something that you might end up actually just picking up along the way to getting to a PhD, right? So I went straight into a PhD program, picked up a master's along the way, because whatever you need to get for the PhD, you're automatically satisfying the master's requirements. Okay, so and Dr. Hart did something similar as well. You will work on an original research project advised by a university professor. You are paid and your tuition and healthcare is covered. And it's pretty much full-time and in person, right? There's no online option. And I think that's a good thing. There's a lot of value being there in person, interacting with other graduate students. That's really where you derive a lot of the value from that program. Okay. So what are some of the differences between these? Typically for doctoral degrees, you got to have better grades and GRE scores if the school is taking GRE scores. Okay. You usually require a little bit more coursework, and there's a more stringent GPA requirement. I pass something called qualifying exams. I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later if we have some time. And you really, I mean, you live, eat, and breathe your research project. Like that's your life for about 5 years, right? Because you are supposed to be the expert on that topic in the world. Okay, so you got to eat, live, and breathe that topic. Okay, and as we said, it will take much longer. Right? So thesis option master is about 2 years, and an additional 4 years usually to get the PhD as well on top of the master. Okay. So things to consider when you're selecting a graduate program, and I'll dive into some of those things a little bit later. If you're thinking about master's degree, some of the things you want to think about are reputation, accessibility, cost, location, proximity to industry maybe, okay, or connections to industry. And you also want to think about your specialization area. So by the end of this year, you should have had a flavor for all of the different aspects of mechanical engineering: controls, energy, mechanics, manufacturing, materials. And so as you're sort of going into your senior year, you want to think about which of those did you find really, really interesting, right? Like what were some of the things that really grabbed you? And that's kind of what you want to start thinking about. If you are wanting to go to graduate school route, what do you want to specialize in, right? Because you don't want the master's degree to be a broad degree. You want to say, I really enjoyed, I don't know, thermodynamics. So you're like, I want to do something that's more focused on the energy sciences and thermodynamics, right? Or something in robotics that you're really interested in. You want to focus in on that, okay? So those are some of the things that you want to consider when you're thinking about where do you want to go for a master's degree. To be honest with the PhD, it's a little bit different because when you're thinking about going for a doctoral degree, it's not the school's reputation that really matters. It's your faculty advisor's reputation that really matters, right? So you're really applying to a person, not necessarily a school. And I'll talk about that in just a second, okay? But the key things you want to keep in mind is like, what is the specific research project that you want to dive into? That should be informing where you want to go to graduate school, okay? And like we said, the cost is typically covered by what are called teaching assistantships, research assistantships, or fellowships. Okay, so you are getting paid. Nobody should be paying out of their pocket to go to get a doctorate. Okay, you shouldn't be doing that. What's that? In engineering. Yeah. Okay. And the other thing I'd also say is look at multiple departments. So there are folks that I know that got their mechanical engineering degree here, but graduate school, they went to an aerospace department, or they went to electrical if they wanted to do something more robotics or controls related. So you're not constrained to go to a mechanical engineering graduate program if you think a better fit would be, say, electrical engineering. Okay.
Yeah, my doctorate's in aerospace.
Yeah.
Materials.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a whole slide on this because I would make the argument this is probably the single most important decision when you're looking to go the more research route is picking your research advisor. Okay, this is the person that will make or break your experience in a lot of ways. Okay, so you know, even if you like the school, the area, the research project, if you get wind that the advisor, the faculty member is problematic, you should think very, very hard about whether you actually want to go and do it. Okay, because you want to work with somebody who is going to advocate for you, who's going to look out for you, who's interested in your growth. Because you hear all sorts of horror stories where advisors just use their students to advance their own agenda, right? So they basically, their lab is just a meat grinder where they get their students to basically do their research so they get famous but then they just take a dump on their students, right? That's not the type of person you want to work for. You want to work for somebody who's really interested in you as a person, wants to see you grow, go on to succeed, and be a positive member in society, right? So, and your advisor is responsible for all sorts of day-to-day things, like making sure you graduate on time, making sure that your defense gets scheduled, right? So if you have a person who's not going to do those kind of things, you could be stuck in a really bad position. Okay, so this is something that you want to spend a lot of time looking into, again, if this is the route that you want to go into. Okay. So if you do get accepted into one of these programs, part of it is required, but one of the things you want to make sure you do is you go visit the school, visit with the advisor, and more importantly, visit with the graduate students of that advisor, because the advisor is always going to look to sell you. They're a salesperson, right? They want to sell their program to you because they want to hire you. So they're going to tell you all sorts of positive things. Yeah. But you want to go talk to their students because they're the ones that know how the sausage is made. Yeah. So they can tell you, yeah, you should totally come here because this person is awesome, or dude, stay away. Like, I made a mistake.
I've been here 8
Yeah,
years.
I've been here 8 years. They won't let me go, right? They'll tell you you're skinny. And so you want to make sure you talk to them about it. Okay. So this is really important. Okay. So just a quick couple of things about timeline. Okay. So if you're thinking about non-thesis masters, okay, and you want to start in the fall right after you graduate, you really kind of want to get a couple of things done over the course of the summer. Okay, like towards the end of the summer even. If you need to take the GRE, which is basically the graduate school version of the ACTs or SATs, you want to try and get them done towards the end of the summer so you're not futzing around with it during your fall semester. Okay, that's not something you want to be dealing with. I did. It was a major mistake, right? I should have gotten it done during the summer. So it's more a cautionary tale than anything else. And then you want to spend some time looking into what are the schools that you want to go to, right? Like what programs you want to apply to, where do you want to go? Spend this summer doing that because it'll pay off, okay? And then usually October to December, so that fall semester of your senior year, that's when the applications open up, and that's when you want to be applying. And one of the things that you may have to do with this is get recommendation letters, right? So you have to find some people who will write rec letters telling you that you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, so that the people that are making the admission decision are like, okay, this is a good person that we want to hire. So you want to start identifying who are the folks that you want endorsing you. Usually you're talking about 3 folks, right? 3 letters of recommendation. And then January to April, so that's your spring semester, you'll start getting letters of acceptance. You can start planning trips to visit the schools, and then you'll make a decision sometime in March or April, and then you're set for the following fall semester. Okay. Yes, sir.
So when you say June to October, you're talking about this coming June, like.
This coming June to October, yeah. If you want to start right after the fall semester after you graduate, yeah. For a thesis, if you want to go a master's thesis, it's much the same deadline, the same kind of timeline, right? But the key difference is once you get your acceptance in the spring of your 4th year, you really want to start thinking about making some trips to visit some faculty who are going to be your prospective advisors. So you can talk to them about the project. They can get a feel for you and see if you would be a good fit for their research group and things like that. Okay. But just about everything else is pretty much the same. And again, this has really changed. A lot of schools don't require GREs anymore, but some of them are going back. They're kind of flip-flopping a little bit. So you want to make sure you have a good understanding of do schools need GRE or not. And if they do, you want to make sure you try and get it taken care of by the end of the summer. Okay? Yeah.
And
Boss.
are the research professors like easily accessible on the?
Yeah. So one way to do this is once you identify a school that you want to go to the department that you're hoping to apply, and they have a faculty directory. And a lot of folks have active websites, right? Where they'll talk about their research group, what research project they're working on, what publications they've written. And a lot of them even now maintain active Google Scholar websites. So you can kind of get a sense of like, how often are they publishing? Have they published recently? Because there are some baller people out there, but haven't published anything for 10 years. Those are probably people you don't want to be applying to because they're sort of sunsetting their career, right? So you want to see, are there people that are still active, still doing a lot of work? Those are the folks that you want to try and work with, right? So you can do it both ways. Yeah.
The information on whether the GRE is needed will also be within the website.
It'll be on the website, yeah. So either at the departmental level website, or most university have what's called the graduate school, and they will have all of the requirements enlisted there too, okay? And then the last one, and then I think I'll open up the floor for questions, is doctoral program. Again, all of this, if you're starting the fall term after your senior year, some key distinctions. Timeline is very much similar, but key distinctions. You're not looking at the schools, you're not looking at the programs, you're looking at the people, right? Like, who are the folks that you want to work with? What projects do you want to get into? Who are the people doing that kind of work, okay? And one of the things that I would recommend with this, especially once you get to that point where you're like, I want to do robotics, I want to do aerodynamics, I want to do whatever it is. One of the things you should do is come talk to your faculty, right? All of us have gone through graduate school, and for the most part, we remain relatively current with what's going on. So if you're like, I really want to do robotics, what are the places I want to go to that does really interesting robotics research? Go talk to Dr. Rodriguez, for instance, right? He knows everything there is to know about robotics, and he can tell you, hey, this school is doing this, there's this faculty member doing that, and they can help you narrow down where you want to go and where you want to apply to, okay? Same goes for any sort of discipline. If you want to do anything related with composite materials, this is the guy, right? Like, if you left here without talking to him about composite materials, you're making a very big mistake, right? So leverage your existing faculty to kind of figure out where are the places you should look into applying, okay? So that should be your summer. And then the rest of the timelines are pretty much the same, but spring semester, plan some trips, okay? In fact, some schools will actually fly you out. They'll pay for it. Like, they have an accepted student day. They'll fly you out, they'll wine you, they'll dine you, you'll meet with a bunch of people, you'll meet with prospective graduate students. It's fun. It was a great way to see a bunch of other campuses. But that's a really good way to do all of these things without a lot of money coming out of your pocket, okay? But yeah, so those are the main things. I have some other stuff, but I've talked enough. I want to make sure you guys have time to ask us any questions that you have about any of this stuff. Yes, sir.
Will this presentation be available for us, like, I guess, where?
Like, to watch it or the slides itself?
The slide itself.
I'll make it available.
We can make
I'll
it.
send out a link with the recording and I'll send out the slides.
Yeah,
In terms of like the research project, is it more what you have the professor, they're working on this and you're working with them on that project? Or is it more like you're very interested in this is what I want to write my research paper for?
the answer is yes, meaning both are equally applicable, right? So certain situations, for any number of reasons, there can be students that come out of their undergrad having a very clear idea of the project that they want to work on or the topic that they're really interested in doing. And then they approach prospective faculty members and be like, hey, this is what I really want to do. And I noticed that you've done tangential work related to this. Is this something that you are willing to advise, right? The tricky thing with that is, at the end of the day, they're the ones that are paying you, right? And the money that they're using to pay you is for a grant that they have written where they have said that they're going to do X, Y, and Z, right? So in those circumstances, they have their own agenda where they have already proposed work that needs to get done. So if you have what you're proposing exactly lines up with what they had in their proposal, then it's a match made in heaven, right? But in other circumstances, you can actually apply for external fellowships. So like the National Science Foundation, Department of Defense, they have graduate student fellowships that are competitive, but are actually really, really lucrative, right? They often pay more than what you would get from faculty members through like assistantships. But if you get one of those after undergrad, now you are bringing money with you, right? And you could say, hey, I have the money to pay for the tuition, my stipend, are you just willing to support the work? And then they will say yes, because why wouldn't they, right? Because there's no money out of their pocket. And then at the end of that fellowship, they can then like convert you over and start paying you out of their grants if it's to the point where your work lines up with some of the stuff that they wanted to do anyway.
We have a question online. Jonah's got his hand up. Why don't you go ahead, Jonah?
Hi, my question was basically this. So a master's or a doctorate after in engineering is basically like you're going into something specific. So to me, I would think that you would try to want to have your mind made up that way of like what industry you're going into, because if I go for a industry that's robotics and then I do something that's not even related to robotics, I don't know how that's a big selling point for me, job wise. So I guess my question is, would you also say it would be more like if we were unsure what we wanted to go into industry wise or like feel it out, would it be more beneficial to go and get may say a master's in like business management or something that way, to instead of just directly engineering? Because I guess I'm just, if you don't have your mind made up, I don't know how you could really be specific.
Do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think there's a couple answers to that. I mean, getting an MBA, that's a choice that you make also, right? That pushes you in a certain direction, right? So yeah, maybe you don't have your mind made up for a specific topic in engineering. I'd say in that particular case, you have two options, right? It's probably go with like a non-thesis master's maybe and just get like a master's degree that's generally broad and so you're not fidgeting yourself. Or second, just pick something that you are interested in, even if you have many different like interests, and just run with it, right? At some point, you decided to become a mechanical engineer. You probably had a lot of different choices to make, but you made a choice and you ran with it, right? So I would love to do a billion things, but I have to like focus my attention on teaching and composites and whatever. So at some point in your life, you have to maybe make a choice. And if you think that graduate school is the right time for you, maybe it's time to bite the bullet and make a choice. Anything you want to add?
The one other option I would add to that is you could always say, I'm not going to go to graduate school now.
Sure.
You could just go work in industry right after you graduate and then be like, oh, this is what I wanted to do, or this is not what I wanted to do, and I want to switch gears. And then hopefully that can then help you inform what graduate degree you might want to do down the line. So that could be a fourth option.
Yeah.
That you might want to consider as well.
Thank,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay.
On that thought, like going into industry first, is it like a big drawback if you go into industry first because you're not like in the academic setting as close to the time that you're going to grad school?
So, I'll be honest. I went into graduate school right after undergrad. Okay, so a lot of my perspective is informed by that. But I also knew a bunch of folks that were in my lab that joined later because they worked in industry for a couple of years and then decided they wanted to come back to graduate school. So obviously people have made both options work, right? I think for me personally, and that's what I want to emphasize, this is me personally, I think I would have really struggled to come back to graduate school after working, because once you start working, you're making money. It's 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, whatever it is, right? You're not doing homework, right? So all of these things are super attractive. And then to then be like, okay, all of these things are there. Let me go ahead and give all of that up, right? To then go back to graduate school, right? And one of the things I will say, and again, this is based off of anecdotal experience talking to some of my colleagues and stuff that did this, they did say it was pretty hard because the work that they were doing in industry was not super technical. Whereas graduate school, it is a ramp up in terms of technical acumen, right? I struggled with graduate school coming out of undergrad. Like I was like, I feel academically well prepared, and graduate school still slapped me around for about a year. So I think from my personal thinking about like, if I was sort of away from that even more and then went to, I would have probably struggled. But again, that's a very me answer, right? Where there are lots of people that have made it work who have done extremely well. And to be honest, the industry experience probably helped them because they could bring that perspective to what they were doing.
There's some people that actually continue to work in industry and go to graduate school like at night too, like a non-thesis option. It's pretty common as well. It's going to take you a little longer to do the full master's, but typically a company paying for you, you're working for them during the day, going to school at night. So you might have a class in here. Yes, one or two more questions.
There's FDA and MSDM, like which one would be more beneficial to us should we want to be actually them?
That's maybe above my pay grade.
It's hard to say. Like I think if you want to go more like the management route where you don't want to stay so much on the technical side of the house, then an MBA would certainly be more beneficial in that route. But if you want to stay more squarely in the technical side of the house, where maybe you want to move up to director of like research or do more like product development stuff, there's an argument to be made maybe the master's degree in engineering would be better suited towards that, you know. The one thing to keep in mind is MBAs are super duper expensive. Like they are aggressively expensive, especially compared to just master's degree in engineering. So that is something you want to think about in terms of, and they're not funded. Like there is virtually no aid. Like you're not going to get fellowships and stuff to get an MBA for the most part. Whereas you have a better shot at that with a master's in engineering sort of program. So something to keep in mind.
Take one more question. Yeah, Josh.
What was the reason why you guys went for like a PhD compared to like a master's? Because it wasn't for money, like what drove me there?
It's true. It's
As you
true.
can tell.
Like,
Way to rub it in. Yeah, it's a personal thing, but.
I knew I wanted to teach, right? Like that's, to be honest, I knew that in undergrad, and that was reinforced to me through graduate school. And so I was like, if I want to have a job where I teach at the university level, I teach engineering, I needed to have a PhD. Like that was a big part of it.
It was similar for me. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to be teaching 100%, but I knew that an undergrad degree, the stuff I was going to be working on was going to bore me. So I wanted something more difficult. All right, thanks, guys.
All right, thanks for coming,
I don't know if
everybody.
there's
That's
any
a
left.
great
No,
question.
no pizza left.
Thank you.
Online folks for joining.